once long ago, not so long ago. And the story I telling you could be true. A man take a pan and with a hammer in his hand, cool so, he invent something new.
Moonshine baby, ring time, rain showers, play time, set out your fingers, set out your toes, Daliman, 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 one.
What is the role of the artist in a society? Coming up on Carib Nation TV, two of the Caribbean's finest artists offer some suggestions.
When America wants to know what's happening in the Caribbean diaspora, there is one clear choice.
Hello, welcome to Carib Nation.
Both people inside and outside are
very excited about today's program.
Looking at you, I can tell that you have traveled the journey.
One television organization brings America close to the people, stories, and events that affects Caribbean life. Get close, get answers, get Carib Nation.
People say to me, Paul King, what's the biggest problem you have in telling stories in the Caribbean? I say, boy, one of the biggest problems is the accent. We have all these different accents, Grenadian, Barbadian, Vincentian, St. Lucian, Dominican, Jamaican, Trinidadian, Bahamian. We have endless accents. Then you have up-tongue accent, you have down-tongue accent. You have accent by accident. You have what kind of accent?
You know, in the Caribbean, I guess like some other parts of the world, the artist is not taken very seriously. Often people believe the artist is just an do you find that still holding there in the region?
What has happened is that the artists themselves have gone out and made their own inroads into the society. A lot of us travel now. We're much more abroad now than we were in the old days. So you find there's a lot of movement at that level, artists finding their way as usual and getting into the metropolitan countries. And you can now stay at home and sort of make money abroad, you know, because we are now traveling. In the old days, you couldn't do it. You had to leave the Caribbean and go abroad and live abroad. But of course, I've always lived at home. I'm one of the few who have lived at home and done it from a long time. But majority of artists now are sort of using Caribbean as base and moving out and coming back home. So that has changed over the years. But as for input into the arts to assist the artists, that there's, you know, there's not much difference in what it used to be many years ago. Artists still very much beg for support from the sponsors, beg from the governments, beg from the, you know, businessmen and so on. So that level, for instance, most of the small islands don't have a proper performing arts theater or a cultural center. And some of those that they have are very badly built without even consulting the artists themselves. So, you know, as I say, they're taken for granted and only seen in terms of, you know, culture when they want to use culture as a political sort of thing. But in terms of putting money into the arts, you know, the Caribbean basically is the same as it was many years ago.
And this is an indictment of both the government and the private sector, I take it.
Well, that too, you see, that too is that culture, maybe because culture is such a vast thing in the sense that we take it for granted, that it's always there and it's nothing you invest in. But there are those thinkers now who are seeing our culture as a means of exporting culture. We do export culture, and there are a few forward-looking thinkers now who are beginning to see that one of the main exports we have in the Caribbean is our culture, our music, our art, our performers, our advisors, our consultants, all these things. And there's a glimmer of light now that the thinking is gradually changing, and you hear it more and more mentioned of culture as an export now. But by and large, the amount of money you see they put into the arts, the amount of scholarships they give for artists, for instance, very, very minimal. You see, from that aspect, nothing much has changed. But the worldview is changing of the role of the artists.
Let me ask you, Velma, as an academic, what do you think accounts for that, I guess, is it unwillingness, reluctance on the part of the society at large to embrace the artist as a legitimate worker, practitioner?
I don't know. I really believe that part of it is scarce resources. The little they have, they put it into something else. I was making a case to an artist some time ago that the doctor really has to be recognized more than you, because you can't mend an arm, and life is more important to people living than anything else. So while it is short-sighted to see perhaps medicine, and I pick on medicine because it has to do with life-saving, as more important than art, it is practical. Though the doctors will tell you they don't get paid either. Right. Maybe we're just too poor to pay anybody. I don't know.
So you think it has to do with the underdevelopment of the society, I guess?
No, well, I don't like the word underdevelopment. Let's just say, I prefer even poverty or...
Paul, I know you have taken poetry to the masses, so to speak. Huh?
To the people.
Yeah, using the language. And Velma, I was reading some of your poems, and you also use the Caribbean dialect, what they call
Yes.
nation language these days. Tell me why you decide to use the language.
It wasn't a decision.
It was a natural.
Yeah,
thing.
it was a natural thing. In fact, I have been finding, as I look back through the things that I have written, that most of my poetry is in English.
Mm-hmm.
Although you can find some that have Creole in them, most of the poetry is in English, but a lot of the prose is in Creole. Now, I don't know why or what. I think that perhaps when I hear voices or when I'm writing down what I hear people speak a lot, and as long as it's prose, I think of talk in patois because that's what people talk in. Mm-hmm. But I suspect that I have been socialized into poetry that is in English. Mm-hmm. It's true that I do have some patois poetry, but if you count it, if you look at it, it's going to be 75% English.
Martin Carter said in a little poem that the poet writes for the unborn and the dead. Who do you write for?
I suppose selfishly first for myself.
Uh-huh.
And then for whoever is affected by the issues I write about. But then the thing is that when you're writing and you're writing to print, you're really writing for the unborn in a sense. I hear him, I understand what he's saying. I'm thinking about a poem that I wrote that I felt that had to be heard. And eventually they asked me to read at the opening of an art exhibition, and I read it. Because it was about the, I don't have it here. It was about the situation, the shooting and everything that's going on now, where people you have been kind to will come back and break your house and kill you simply because you have had enough to have been kind to them. A whole lot of terrible things are happening in our society. And I felt, when I had written that, I felt that people needed to recognize that. Even if they know it, I needed to say it, to tell them. And so I'd get out there and speak it. Now somebody like Paul has the edge because he's always talking to the people, so that whatever he has to say, everybody will hear.
Yeah.
You know, it's a. I just think it's a more useful decision, his, to go out and tell people, because I really believe that if the artist is to make an impact, somebody has to hear. Right. And I remember Bongo Jerry, if you know anything about Rasta, you will know his name, who's an excellent poet. But he, at some point, said Mabrak. Now I noticed Yasso Safari has written a Mabrak as well. I told him he'd have to call it Mabrak too. Anyway, what Bongo Jerry eventually said is that his people are not reading. So he has to go and find out about writing songs. Or I remember Garth St. Thomas saying at some point long ago that the Caribbean writer is going to have to make films. In other words, the need to reach the people is obviously there. So it seems to me that the man who has reached the people, or who is reaching the people, is making far more of an impact than those of us who are just writing in books.
Well, a lot of it has to do with that in the early stages, when we start as writers, we start off as creative people. We didn't study literature. I mean, you know, we're not writing like you study literature and you're going to become a writer. You become a writer. You just write. And if something is not there, you create it. I mean, I published my own books because I couldn't get a publisher. Nobody was willing to publish dialect poetry. It's a limited market. They want to publish the novel that can sell. It's business. Publishing is a business.
Exactly.
So it's left up to the artist to publish his own work if he wants it. Yeah, so you say, okay, I'm going to do that. You make a conscious decision to put out your own work. But then, who do you follow? You have nobody ahead of you to guide you into how you write this thing down, because we're trying to write sound on the page. So you develop your own technique. You become the pioneer and people follow you. Either correct you, build on you, criticize you. But you have, at that point, no guide in time except yourself. So you become the creative force doing this thing, and future generations will build on it and develop something. But the point is that when you say you're a writer, I always say you have Caribbean writers and Caribbean people who write. Right? No, when you write, I think of the person listening to me. I'm not writing for England, I'm not writing for America, I'm writing for West Indians to understand me. And then my first thought is the man in the role going to understand this? So I have to use the language and the words that I know he will relate to. Now, there are some people we are calling famous writers who write poetry, and they're Caribbean writers, and nobody in the Caribbean could understand them. You understand? So you say to yourself, this man is our greatest writer, and yet nobody in this area here his own society can understand anything he has written. Yet he's a great writer. He's writing for the world. He's a world writer. But we have to say, I will not get a Nobel Prize, for instance, because I'm not writing for English or critic to say it's a great writing. I'm right. If the man in the street says it's great, fine, but he ain't giving out Nobel Prize, right?
Yeah.
So you make a conscious effort that you will lose audience, you will lose sales because your book will not sell abroad, because it's not a thing that will go to Australia or England and stuff because the publisher, you know, the limited market. But it's a conscious decision you make to write for your own people, and therefore you accept the fact that your publishing will be limited as such. But this is what you want to do, is a conscious thing. And I figure if you're writing for your people should understand you. That's the first criterion, I think, that, you know, if you're writing for somebody, that they understand you. And therefore you're very conscious of who when I write, I can almost see the audience responding to it. And I laugh along sometimes what I'm writing, because I'm almost getting the joke. And if it works for me when I'm writing, it will work for them. But you're not conscious of English audiences critiquing it. You're thinking of the fella downtown listening to this cassette, you know. And therefore you're really writing for your people. Now, you become a writer, what they call a writer, like we hear now as a writer, you suddenly ask to analyze what you're doing, you know? And then I say, this is when you get your degree. You start off with your degree first. This is when you try to understand what have I been doing all these years, you know? And then, of course, this thing comes up of what is a writer who writes and what is a
Velma, you've been
writer.
itching to jump in.
Well, the thing is that, I mean, my history has been a little different. I mean, I've been writing as long as I could remember, but I've also been studying English. And I want to make the point, though, that I think that the whole notion of talking to the society, this orality, is really quite different from the scribal thing. And from the time you write and you think about it first as something in a book, it's a different audience. The Caribbean does not have a reading audience. So even if the Nobel Prize winner had written everything for people to read, there is not that reading audience. I mean, the people who write novels in the Caribbean don't get read that much either, because we have not yet created a reading audience. This is why when publishers publish our things, they want to make sure first that it can sell on all the islands, each different island, and everywhere, and some other places, because no place has enough people reading. We know we have that problem. We are an oral tradition.
Exactly.
So that if you go out there to talk to the people, they will hear you. But if you are going to put it in a book, you have a serious problem. So it seems to me that whether the person who is going to get the Nobel Prize wrote highfalutin stuff or simple stuff, he would probably not get read. Because reading is not one of the things that we do a lot of. We talk.
Well, yes, okay, but a lot of it has to do with how you, when you the writer write, what is in your mind. That's what I'm trying to say. So that as far as I was concerned, when I was writing for those people to understand. You're not considered whether they're reading you or not. The creative man doesn't consider whether the person is reading the book. At the moment, he's creating.
He's creating.
It's afterwards the question. In other words, if I start off like being, as you say, trained in literature and in publishing, my first thought would be, this thing can't sell because these people don't read. So that's why I'm saying we start at the other end.
You want to talk to the people.
But write for the people. We're not considering whether people. No, that question never enters your mind whether the people can read. That's an academic understanding later on here, you know. But people don't read. The creative man doesn't stop to ask people to read.
He creates.
He wants to write a book.
But
that question comes afterwards.
You didn't write first. You spoke first, and this is a point I'm making. You go and you talk to the people, and this is very important. After they have heard you, they will probably go and read your stuff.
Yeah, but no, my point is that the motivating factor when you write is that you want to write about the question of whether people read. You see, as I'm saying, after you've got your degree and you come now to this point, you ask, what have I done? Then you say, I've written books. Then you say, but you know, people don't really read those books. But that question, if that question arose first, you might never write. It's my point. You might just speak. You might never put the thing.
Paul, you're unique in the sense that when you came on the scene in 1970s in terms of recording your poetry, you took the Caribbean by storm, because I think what you did is you took their own experiences and give it back to them in their own language. The Tanti morals, for example, can be found in every little village or town in the Caribbean, and Slim and all these characters. So the point I'm driving at here is that you took a leap in a way that other artists didn't do.
Well, again, it is that the thing about it is being a creative person, and the thing is, when I wrote that book and put out that cassette, the album, the first album, I never knew anything about putting out albums. It was like a project. Like you say, okay, let us carve a piece of wood, you know. I asked, how do you put out an album? They say, you tape it, and you go to you get a jacket cover made, and you get it stamped out, you know. So it was done as a project, and it took off. The society was ready. But at that point, I was not a writer, performer, and this was my first reading of my first book. That's how come this thing started.
Okay.
I did these little stories, I put them together in a book, and for the same thing, people said, why don't you have a reading? So I said, let's make a show, and that's just how it happened. I had a show, we taped the show. About half of the tape was spoiled, but enough was left, and I said, let's make a record. It's all like, let's say, oh, let's go and build a little black house now, make an African village.
Right.
You're not knowing where it's going, and suddenly the thing just took off, you see? So it takes a lot of guts to say you're going to make an album. Now it's easy, you have technology, make cassettes, CDs, everybody now can put out. But in those days, it was a big process to make an album, you know. You had to send to New York, you got to get stampers made abroad, sent back, you know, and then you got to stamp these things out. And it was a whole thing, but you did it as a something to do, like a hobby, and suddenly the thing takes over your whole life, and you become a writer, performer, and all these happens. And at the end of the line, you look back now and say, hey, this is what I have done. But at the moment you're doing it, it is just something you're doing.
Look, we've been talking a lot and engaging in some little theory, I guess. let's do some pieces. Paul, you want to start with
Okay, I'll do the same because, you know, I like people like the humor, but you need the audience for that kind of thing. And this thing I'll do is called The Story of the Pan. Of course, you know, the pan was made in Trinidad.
Right.
And there are many stories how the pan was made. So I wrote this thing called Unwrap, you know, and it's supposed to give an idea of how the first pan was invented. Once long ago, not so long ago, and the story I telling you could be true. A man take a pan, and with a hammer in his hand, cool so, he invent something new. It was an ordinary drum in which the oil used to come. It didn't make no particular sound. One note, maybe two. You could beat it till you blew. That was all it could do for you. Then this man got a plan with that hammer in his hand, and he said, I think I understand. Because if the drum making one, and the drum making two, well then the drum could well make quite a few. So the man take the pan with the hammer in his hand, and he stooped down there on the ground, and he hit it, and he beat it, and he stretch it, and he mark it, and the pan start to make a new sound. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. Hey, was a do, re, mi, and a mi, re, do was all you could make it play. But it sung so sweet that he take it in the street, and that was the first time they hear pan play. And all way he go, man, the crowds gather around, and they jump to the notes that he pong. And none would forget how they dance and they fete on the day that the steel band was born. And since that time, all over the land, you could hear the sweet sound of pan. For they heat it, and they beat it, and they stretch it, and they mark it, like that man with a hammer in his hand. They make a tenor pan, and they make a second pan. Then they come and make a double tenor too. Then they make a guitar pan, and they make a cello pan. Now, it taking 100 man to make a band. They play do, re, mi, and fa, sol, la, ti, do, ain't no place the pan can go. Upper class, middle class, lower class, no class. Classics, Kaiso. It was born on the streets of Trinidad. It has now gone far and wide. And there ain't no stopping, and there ain't no staying. It's a sound of a people's pride. So when you hear the beat of that steel band in the street, and the shuffle of 1,000 feet, remember that man with that hammer in his hand, who put the first notes on a pan. How he hit it, and he beat it, and he stretch it, and he mark it, as he stooped down there on that ground. How he hit it, and he beat it, and he stretch it, and he mark it, and the pan start to make that new sound. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. Unwrap.
Beautiful.
With all due respect, Paul, that piece could be understood by any audience, Caribbean audience or world audience.
I am glad you said that, because I wanted to say with due respect, so we talk about this language business because that is my study. I do not know to what extent it's a conscious effort, and I'm sure it is not, because you're talking the way you would talk in the Caribbean. But it is not true that your talk is without a whole lot of English. I heard some tenses there in that poem, but now that I've been asked to listen to it closely, or now that I haven't listened, no, it has everything.
Yes, but
it is along the whole, everybody's talk is in there, but in such a way too that everybody else can understand it. And I know you don't do it on purpose, because it's something that Olive Senior does a lot too. She writes a lot of dialect, but everybody can, a lot of Creole, I must call Creole. I mean Creole, I don't mean dialect, because dialect means something else. I mean the Creole. But what these people do, and I'm using these people, they either select or intuitively use the main markers of Creole or non-standard speech, like the unmarked verb. He didn't mark most of those verbs, but it didn't matter, because there were other things there indicating time. If you take any one feature of this Creole language and use it, it makes what you're saying Creole, absolutely. But it is also comprehensible, because you're using that one feature. You're not going into conservative Creole, which most people can't understand.
But see, there's a variety within the art form, because we do different styles. You see, there's different styles in the with the dialect, and there are different structures you use. Of course, the artist that you say, okay, you ask me to do a piece, and I have to select the piece that I'm thinking now not of Caribbean audience, but of and you have to bridge, you see, so
but that piece is very popular in the Caribbean too. It's a great piece.
But it can transcend every level. It can transcend every level.
I take your point. I mean, Caribbean people ought not to cede English, standard English to somebody. So maybe we've made a tremendous contribution to the English language.
No, but we use English
and we use it on the Creole.
They are important. They should. But you see, the point I'm making with them is that I've always said, in the writing, that if I had to become a critic of the thing, there are certain things that I would have to look at as a critic, being a performer. And one would be, how does the poem adapt to different audiences?
Okay, fine,
or what change you can have to make? Because you have to make conscious changes, unconscious, automatically you go on the stage, the audience changes. Your whole mode is like a computer, your whole mode changes because you see children in the front. It's an automatic thing. Your mind just adjusts the piece to suit the children. And sometimes, so to critique a piece, maybe you have to say, how well can this piece be adjusted to different audiences? Or it can only work at one level of audience, you see? And then you have the dialect that in performance, I say you give as much pronunciation. You see, I'm using diction. No, it is dialect with diction, is what I say. Because you take as much energy and focus to say, friends, Romans, countrymen, as you say, Papa God step out into space. It is step out into space. People think dialect is a boy, blah, 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 blah. But no, it's performance. People have, even the dialect, people have to understand. The dialect people listening have to understand too. Because they will also miss things if you don't pronounce the words. So a lot of people do dialect thinking they have to talk badly, run words together, but you don't. In performance, you have to be heard and understood just as in any other language. So sometimes in performance, we overpronounce, even the dialect, because we're conscious of the same thing as any other language. You have to be heard by the man at the back of the hall. No matter how great an artist you are, if you don't pronounce your words, even if you want to say them say, you say them say. Nobody knows. You have to say them say, all you, all you going down the road. It is still, I'm consciously separating the word because I'm consciously thinking of the man listening. So when I'm talking to you like, I say, boy, all you're going to think, who cares what you're going to think? Because your ear is tuned. So even though we run the words together, that's why foreigners have such a hard time understanding us when we speak. They say, we can't understand you, because we are running words. Now, take that same thing and go on the stage to say it. You automatically begin to separate the words. You're thinking of performance. They have to hear. So all you're going down the road. So you exaggerate a lot. So it's just a mode you're going into as a performer. Just like any other performer on the stage, you begin to project, and this is why you're a performer, you see? But when you come back to the normal dialect, because sometimes, like we speak here, we speak nice and stuff, and we run. When you listen back to the tape, boy, you're so embarrassed because you find you eat up all the words. but when you're doing it, you don't notice that. When we speak to each other, that's why when people listen back to a tape of themselves, they're so shocked. because they never realized that they were sort of running words together and mumbling. This is why some people are bad recording artists. They have to record in studio because they cannot record on stage. They make a lot of noise, they pop their mouth, they do all kinds of things that spoil recordings. But in performance, nobody notices that on a stage. But you tape that and go and make a record. You hear him pop, you have to cut, and you end up with nothing on the record.
Velma, we take a piece from you now.
Yeah, but I'm going to read a piece that you mentioned.
Kingston.
I
yes,
think perhaps you mentioned it because you know less of my stuff.
No. I'm going to ask you to do another piece, but I want you to do this piece in particular.
Kingston. Moonshine baby, ring time, rain showers, playtime. Set out your fingers, set out your toes, Dallyman, 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 one. But here there are no children. For pint-sized scrunters walk the endless plazas, whispering their pleas. Give me a 10 cents, no? And pint-sized sufferers haunt traffic lights unsummoned to your windscreen. No mothers for moonshine. No grannies warming loving cans with mint or black sage, sweet and hot, sound sleep and peaceful dreams, and early morning rising. Dew will clear your eyes, the mist brings strength. This trackless city, withering the young, old people festering in the slums, hope felt now hopeless, darkness down pressing till the mind forgets its country moonshines with their dreams of city streets alive. Stark now and stinking with a stench of dead hopes rotting.
The reason I like that piece is that it speaks to the social situation. It speaks to what is happening in the Caribbean. And I want to pose this question to both of you. What is the function of the artist? Is the function of the artist just to mirror what's happening in society?
To bring it to, certainly to bring it to society's attention. I don't know what else you can do besides say, look, this is what is happening. The poem I mentioned earlier, which as I said, I don't have here, which is saying that what's happening to people, even if you're kind to people, they'll still chop you up. Look out. We're breeding a set of, we're breeding some people we don't recognize. How can we stop it? Now, I don't know what else the artist can do besides bring it to people's attention.
Paul?
But I agree, sir. Great that you bring it to people's attention. And you also have a duty to record what's happening in my experience of we people who look at the immediate society. Again, it's worse today because society is changing so fast that the words that used to hang around here for a couple of years, within 3 months they're gone. So somebody's not writing today about the slang and the language of the people of 1996. That is lost. So while you try to preserve the past, which again black people have to do, try and hold on to your folklore and your history, you also have to pay attention to the contemporary society and use a kind of language that can relate to the people of today, but also record what's happening. I mean, we have AIDS, we have drug abuse, we have all kinds of things in the society we never had 20 years ago. So that must be reflected in the poetry of today and the language of today, and what people are doing.
This conversation can go on and on and on and on, but of course our time has run out. I want to thank you all for coming on to Carib Nation. Velma Pollard, thank you very much. And Paul Keens-Douglas, thanks very much. Hope you come back whenever you
come back
on to the program. We can have a more extensive discussion.